Biology, Chapter 18, Theory Video 7. Now we are going to look at biodiversity. So biodiversity is the degree of variation of different life forms in an ecosystem. So we know what an ecosystem is. Ecosystem is the combination of the living and non-living factors in a particular area or a particular habitat. Then but this biodiversity is defined of that within that premises, but it actually includes much more wider understanding than the list of species that lives in a particular area. So the biodiversity, when we discuss biodiversity, we take three factors into consideration. The first thing is the number and range of ecosystems and habitats, the number of different species in the ecosystem and their relative abundance, and also the genetic variation within each species. Now, when you take certain areas, the biodiversity is really high. Now, when you consider Congo Basin in Africa and Southeast Asia, the Caribbean and the Central America, Amazonia and Southwest Australia, and also the Sinharaja forest in Sri Lanka, they all have the huge biodiversity. There are many endemic species. Endemic is they live only in that area and nowhere else. There are many different flora and fauna in Amazon and Congo Basin, which are not found. Animals and plants both, and obviously the microorganisms as well would be living in high relative abundance in these areas. So for millions of years they have been evolved individually and separately. They have developed into different species, and they would not be found anywhere else in the world. So now when you consider this picture, you can see that because New Zealand was isolated for many millions of years, isolated in the sense it was broken away. The New Zealand landmass has broken away from Australia millions of years ago. So it has been always separated by the ocean. So as a result, there are many endemic species found there. Now, this is a tuatara. They have become extinct everywhere else. So the scientists have actually found ancient relatives of this animal in Australia and other parts of the world. However, they have all gone extinct except for in Australia. So this is in relation to the biodiversity. So now the tropical forests, especially tropical rainforests, like in Sri Lankan Sinharaja, and in this photograph it is shown here in Costa Rica, the trees are covered with epiphytes. That is the plants that grow on other plants. So it is actually a different miniature world for smaller habitats, and they produce smaller habitats and for small animals such as beetles and tiny many different animals, birds, etc., to live in these habitats. So the bare bark of trees in temperate forests will be a good enough habitat for these animals to live. So then one tree, they say that a single tree of a tropical rainforest can contain up to about 1,200 different species of beetles alone. So this is not organisms, this is 1200 species of beetle. So that means it is a entirely different, even we could even use a universe. It is an entirely different such biodiversity is present in these plants. Now, for example, even Sri Lanka had been something like that, but destruction of natural habitat has caused us to see only cats, dogs, and human beings in our vicinity. So an ecosystem is self-contained. That means also it could be self-sufficient as well. All of the requirements are found within that, due to the participation of the different communities of organisms. So they interact with the environment in which they live, and they interact with one another as well. So a forest ecosystem will include the community of organisms and the soil. Then the dead leaves that form leaf litter, the water in the rain and in the streams, the air, the rocks, and all the physical and chemical factors, and all of these things, the living and the non-living part of the environment, will affect how they interact. So these are they cannot be they cannot be they when we say that they are relatively self-contained, we actually mean that they are not entirely self-contained. That means they will definitely have interactions with others in other ecosystems as well. For example, this bird will be a perching point of some birds. Then some a tiger or some animal who is walking about can come and visit there. The fleas of these animals. Then other the worms or whoever that is carried will get introduced to these things. So they might there would be migratory birds. So they will come here, they will find food, and they will breed. So these are the natural phenomena that makes the ecosystems to not be self-contained entirely. Now when you take a single pond, it is an ecosystem, because that water provides. A single pond is a different world inside it. It is a very different world, because it has a different environment from the soil and air around it. So the organisms in the pond community will be different from the organisms who are living around the pond, in air and in soil. So then the largest, different from this pond, would be the large ocean, which is going to be a huge ecosystem. Now when you take a tropical rainforest, it is a complex rainforest or a coral reefs. Now if you take the Australian Great Barrier Reef, for thousands of kilometers, it is very long, and it is huge. So but when you take the ecosystem and the biodiversity in them, it is hugely complex, because there are very different ecosystems found. Small ecosystems are quite different from one another, and the species living in those parts are again very different from one another. So as a result, they would be they are very complex. However, when you take sandy deserts, they are large, but they are ecosystems, and as a result, the biodiversity is very simple. So when we come to habitat, so habitat is the place where a single species or the collection of species live as a community within that ecosystem. The niche occupied by a species is more than a physical description of a place. A niche is the role of an organism in an ecosystem. That is, the how what responsibility is there for a certain organism in the ecosystem is what we defined as a niche. uh, Now, when we say an organism's niche, uh, we are actually describing where it is, how it obtains energy, and how it interacts with the physical environment as well as the other species. Now, all of these organisms, they require other species as well as the natural world, or the living and non-living components of the environment or the habitat are needed by these animals. So then, to obtain and fulfill their requirements, they have special adaptations in them, so that they are capable of obtaining their or fulfilling their requirements. Uh, Now, to these are actually simple definitions. There are, when you take a single organism, they have many different ways of interacting with the living and non-living components of the world, and as a result, they have a completely different way of interacting with the ecosystem they are in. Write down a note for this. Biodiversity, leave a line and put a dash and write down the degree of variation of life forms in an ecosystem, which includes diversity at below three levels. Number one, number and range of ecosystems and habitats. Number two, the number of different species in the ecosystem and their relative abundance. Number three, the genetic variation within each species. Leave a line and write. Some areas such as Congo Basin in Africa, Southeast Asia, Amazonia, Caribbean, etc., have high biodiversity, meaning they have many different species living in those areas, including many endemic species. Leave a line and write. Endemic species are found only in a particular area and nowhere else. And leave a line and write. An ecosystem, put a dash, a relatively self-contained interacting community of organisms and their environment in which they live and with which they interact. Leave a line. Forest ecosystem, community of organisms, the soil, dead leaves, water in the rain and in streams, the air, rocks, and the physical and chemical factors in it. However, organisms of one ecosystem will interact with organisms of other ecosystems. As a result, not a single ecosystem is entirely self-contained. Tropical rainforests have complex biodiversity, while sandy deserts may have simple biodiversity. A habitat is a leave a line and write. A habitat is a place where species live within an ecosystem. Next point, niche, N-I-C-H, niche, is the role of an organism in an ecosystem, which describes where it is, how it obtains energy, how it interacts with both physical environment and with other species. Species diversity is what we need to discuss next, right? The Before we come to species diversity, I want you to do question number 6. If you have any questions, please raise them.